Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rolene Marks. This is the Israel Brief, brought to you, as always, by Lay of the Land, where we bring you the top stories making headlines in Israel every Monday to Thursday. Now, this weekend has been one of the bloodiest and most violent in Israel in a long time, and has been truly devastating for the whole country. So let's break it down. Let's talk about what happened over the past weekend, starting with Friday night. A lone gunman terrorist entered the Jerusalem neighborhood of Neve Yaakov and opened fire on Israelis. Some were exiting a nearby synagogue. At least 7 people were killed and 3 others wounded. The terrorist was neutralized. And on Saturday morning, on Shabbat, a father and son walking close to the city of David were shot by a 13-year-old lone terrorist. Now, just let that sink in for a minute. 13-year-old armed terrorist. He was neutralized. He wasn't killed, but he was neutralized by a civilian passerby. Later on Saturday at about 7:45, 2 Palestinian gunmen opened fire at the Almog Junction. They tried to fire into a restaurant, but the gun jammed, and thank goodness nobody was hurt or even killed. And in the early hours of Sunday morning, a infiltration into the Yeshuv of Kedumim, and thank goodness the terrorist was shot. But a very, very violent weekend, and the country is reeling over one of the deadliest weekends and deadliest terror attacks to strike the capital. The international community has responded with absolute outrage. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres condemned the attacks, as have world leaders from Vladimir Zelensky to Emmanuel Macron to President Biden to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and many, many others. The United Nations Security Council, which includes the United Arab Emirates, as well as the United Kingdom, Russia, China, and the USA, as well as France, Mozambique, Switzerland, and several other countries, issued a unanimous condemnation of the terror attacks. The Global Council of Imams also issued a condemnation and were very, very quick to call out Palestinian terror for what it was. And all of them stressed that this attack had taken place on the 27th of January, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's an international day that is set aside for Holocaust remembrance, adding a particular kind of not just a poignancy, I think that is the wrong word, but just an assault into a already very, very painful wound. However, getting it wrong was the mainstream media, outlets like the New York Times, the BBC, and various others, trying to draw a moral equivalence between Israel's counter-terror operations that took place in Jenin last Thursday morning and the terror attacks that started on Friday night. Now, I just want to reiterate something important. There is absolutely no moral equivalency with a counter-terror operation designed to stop a terror cell in a already hotbed of terror activity, as we know in Jenin, where 8 out of 9 casualties on Thursday were members of Palestinian Islamic Jihad preparing to carry out a mass terror attack on intel from the Shin Bet. Our counter-terror troops acted to quickly mitigate what could have been an absolute disaster. There is no comparison, no moral comparison between that and the deliberate targeting of civilians for murder. So I just want to make that very clear. The military operation in Jenin is not a reason for a Palestinian terrorist, whether he be a lone gunman in his 20s, like on Friday night, or a 13-year-old boy, to carry out a terror attack. Meanwhile, Israel has responded by arresting nearly 50 in connection with the terror attacks in the homes of both the terrorists who carried out the attack on Friday night and the 13-year-old boy have been sealed off for demolition. Israel has said that we will be revoking the citizenship and the residency if this passes a vote at the Knesset of anyone who carries out terror attacks. And new Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that all terrorists will either meet a prison cell or a cemetery. We now go to Saturday night, where regular protests have become the norm in the city of Tel Aviv, as well as around the country in other cities like Beersheba, Haifa, Jerusalem, and many others. These protests are against proposed overhauls to the Supreme Court that the Minister of Justice, supported by the coalition government, intend to put forward. On Saturday night, there was a minute's silence for the victims of terror, and no music was played throughout Saturday night's Tel Aviv-based protest. Yesterday, a Tel Aviv-based high school went on strike for an hour. They say that this is their protest against what they call concerns for their future. Meanwhile, economists and legal experts continue to weigh in on the proposed overhaul, saying this does not bode well for democracy. This could spell the death knell of Israeli democracy and would seriously impair our economy. The sentiment was shared by the stock exchange and share prices on Monday morning. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu last night. Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked President Macron for expressing his condolences on the horrific terror attacks that took place over the weekend, and the two leaders both condemned Iran's direct involvement on attacks on civilians in war-torn Ukraine. The two leaders agreed to meet relatively soon. And our final story, because we really try and end on a positive note, and after this weekend, which has really been emotionally wrenching, I'd like to end on this note. On Friday, as you know, it was International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we saw ceremonies across the world from His Royal Highness King Charles and his Queen Consort hosting a survivor of Darfur, to the Prince and Princess of Wales lighting memorial candles, to leaders all across the world commemorating International Holocaust Remembrance Day. But I think perhaps the most poignant was in the United Arab Emirates, Israel's Abrahamic brother, where a variety of ceremonies took place across the country. And it was very moving to see Emiratis singing Israel's national anthem, Hatikva, at these various ceremonies. The United Arab Emirates has adopted mandatory Holocaust education in schools, and this will go a long way to mitigating growing Holocaust denial that is commonplace across the region. And we really thank our friends, the Emiratis, for this incredible gesture and sensitivity to Jewish issues. And that brings me to the end of today's broadcast. Don't forget to check out our original content online at www.layoftheland.online. There is always new content for you. Today we have news from the Arab world you're only going to get on Lay of the Land. Our Facebook community is at Lottel's site. I know that there are many issues with Facebook at the moment. So if you are watching this on YouTube, please consider going onto our Facebook page, like us, share our content, follow us. Our YouTube channel, as always, is at The Israel Brief. Click on that red subscribe button, like and share our content. And we're on Twitter at Lay of the Land 5. I'm Rolene Marks. This is The Israel Brief. Join me again tomorrow for your top stories.